Well, I'm Rene Banglesdorf, and I am the CEO of a company called Charlie Bravo Aviation. We buy and sell corporate aircraft, and I'm also the vice president for representing the business aviation industry for the International Aviation Women's Association, and that association is a 30-year-old organization that promotes women at the highest levels in aviation. And I want to talk about a few different things this morning before I ask Maria, who's an amazing icon in this industry, a few questions about this. So there's a lot of attention to gender equality right now. Sheryl Sandberg wrote Lean In several years ago, and that's gotten a lot of media attention and a lot of discussion. And we're not going to talk about the presidential election, but that has brought up a lot of questions about women in the highest roles of leadership. And it's interesting because, and I'm sure you find the same thing, a 2012 Credit Suisse study called Gender Diversity and the Impact on Corporate Performance, among dozens of other studies, have found that having women in the workplace at significant levels makes a huge difference. That Credit Suisse study indicated that, and it was with 2,400 global companies over a period of 6 years, found that those companies with gender diverse boards outperformed those with male only boards by 26%. Other studies show that female representation on boards caused a higher return on equity, a higher return on sales, and a higher return on invested capital. Sheryl Sandberg's talked in her book and a number of times in the industry about wanting her team to match her consumers. And it's interesting when we look back, I know you probably remember this movie and some of you in the audience may not, but Mr. Mom came out in 1983. And Terry Garr was a stay-at-home mom and Michael Keaton worked. And when they went through a recession, roles reversed and Terry's character got a job and Michael Keaton became Mr. Mom. And it was interesting in that movie, the woman that Terry Garr played had a great advertising idea to market tuna fish to women because she was a woman, and it saved the company. And so that's some of the stuff that women bring to the board. We have a different perspective, we have different ideas, and we're able to market better to a very strong buying audience in females. So there are definitely benefits to having women in leadership. And the big question in aviation is we've been looking around, and as we were joking this morning as we were watching the video on the screen, there are a lot of men in aviation. And the reason that I asked Maria to speak with us this morning is to talk about how do we attract, retain, and promote women in aviation. And I think it's really important, and it's something that she's done quite a bit of. Maria, you worked at Continental in leadership, and then at United Airlines in leadership, and then you switched industries and worked for Royal Caribbean, and then came back, and you're now the COO and president of Signature Flight Support, which has done marvelously well under your leadership. And I mentioned earlier that I told you earlier that I live in Austin, Texas. Well, Greg Antonacek, your GM there,
Yes,
has the most wonderful things to say about you. He says that you're very inclusive, that you make all of your GMs across the board feel like an important part of the team.
they are. They absolutely are critical to our success.
Absolutely, but your celebration of that is something that's unique in this industry, and it's made Signature very successful. So you've been there for 8 years?
Almost 7 years.
7 years, and under that time, you did one of the largest acquisitions
We are almost completed. We actually completed the acquisition, and we're now almost completed with our integration. And fortunately, it's been a great and successful integration as a result of the hard work of the men and women that are at Signature.
That's amazing. So on to some questions about your expertise.
Sure.
What do you think are the challenges or opportunities of being a woman in this industry?
Well, I'll start with the challenges. The challenges are obvious. The gender inequality in our industry is very visible, but I see that as an opportunity, and I've always seen it as an opportunity. I chose to be in the aviation industry when I was 12 years old, and from the time I was a very young girl, my parents, we came to this country. I came when I was 4 years old from Cuba. And during that time frame, my parents worked very hard to put my brother and I through school. And I remember every Saturday, if we got good grades during Monday through Friday, the special outing was to watch airplanes take off and land at Miami International Airport. And I just thought that was the greatest thing that we could possibly do. And I fell in love with aviation, and at that time, basically the only thing that a female would consider in aviation was becoming a stewardess. In those days, they referred to them as stewardesses, later flight attendants. And I must have applied 50 times to become a flight attendant, until finally, this very honest and direct recruiter said, "Sweetheart, you're not pretty enough to be a flight attendant." And that was the catalyst that really pushed me to finish my college education. And so I finished school and I got a job and I kept applying at the airline, and it was Eastern at the time, Eastern Airlines, that actually was my first airline. And I reflect on this because one negative comment actually changed the course of my life. The course of my life was that I went to Eastern and I rose through the ranks and I became a management leader, and I was in love with this industry, and I, went through bankruptcy, shut down, reorganization, moved to Continental, went through bankruptcy, reorganization, moved to United, and fortunately was in the glory days of the airlines in the 90s when the airlines did really, really well, and made it through that whole transition. Moved to the cruise line business, very similar business as it relates to gender inequality. The difference is you have a lot of Scandinavian males that basically want to let you know that they know everything about shipping and everything about marine, and you can't possibly know anything to be in that business. But what they didn't know was how to treat a guest on a ship and what to do with guests, right? So it was an interesting transition, and I remember when I left the airline business and joined the cruise line business in 2000, everyone I knew said, "What are you doing and why are you doing it?" So I've always chosen to take a risk in what is traditionally a male-dominated business. And it's because I've liked the businesses. And so I don't see any glass ceiling or brick wall. I don't see those things. I see the industry. And if the industry is attractive, then I feel we should even push it further. These two industries, in particular aviation, there is a problem today in how we create interest in this business. And the problem starts actually in middle school. And in middle school today in America, we're very focused on STEM. There's no question that that's important to focus on science and math and engineering and technology. There's no question about it. But what we're not doing in aviation is focusing the career in STEM towards aviation. And it's being focused on Silicon Valley, it's being focused on other industries, startups, industries that require more engineering. But aviation, for whatever reason, isn't falling into that equation. And actually, aviation should be an industry that's introduced early on. And then it's our job to actually create the succession and create the interest in the organization to see people evolve and develop as leaders. So when I came to Signature, and actually one of my wonderful, very prominent colleagues and leaders at Signature is Mary Miller, and she's with us this morning, I made it very clear from the outset that my focus was to make sure that we represented our customer base and that we represented our employee base, and that leaders could not just be what I would call generic leaders, right? And it's not that I'm trying to profile. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create diversity of thought, diversity of behavior, and diversity within our work teams. And so I think that over the last 7 years, we've worked really, really hard on this, and particularly gender diversity. We have more female managers at FBOs today than any FBO network, and not just because we're large. We have more female managers in terms of ratio than any other network. We have women on the line. We are encouraging our managers to hire line service techs, females. Why? They actually create a much better balanced operating environment for us than an all-male environment. They think, they rationalize their operating behavior. I'm not saying males don't, but they introduce a different approach to the point that you made about boards. So we see that it's really business beneficial for us to have that type of integrated environment. Going back to your board comment, I thought it was very interesting. I've been on 4 corporate boards in the United States, and I can assure you that there is a completely different perspective when you have a different perspective on the board from a gender perspective, particularly as it relates to consumer businesses. So whether it's retail, restaurants, hotels, supermarkets, the view of a woman in terms of a user of that experience, service, or product, and the view of a male are different. And neither of them is right or wrong, but they're both very complementary. And so I see it as essential, and I see it as part of where America needs to be across every boardroom in America. And I don't know if you're familiar with this story, Rene, but during the recession, the crisis, at the beginning of the crisis, one of the countries that was severely affected was Iceland. And Iceland actually lost its currency at the beginning of the recession. It was a very, very difficult time for the country. And there was one bank, and it was a banking crisis that basically drove it. And there was one bank that had not experienced the risk that had occurred in the rest of the banking system, which brought the entire country down financially. And this bank was run by women. Interesting. And the entire board was female. So they made financial investment decisions that were very balanced, but they never went for the decisions that would give them 20% returns, 30% returns. They basically were managing a portfolio within a range of 5 to 7, underperforming everyone else. But that was their decision. So when this happened in Iceland, the EU said, well, why did that bank survive? And that's when Credit Suisse and a number of other organizations came in and did an analysis on what happened. Well, there was just a better balance of risk. So today in the EU, I don't know if you're aware of this, there is a regulation that requires publicly traded companies to have a minimum amount of females on their boards. And that's a mandate in the EU. It's not a mandate in the United States. But what it does is it sort of de-risks the inclination to be more gutsy or more risk-oriented in decision-making or investment processes. So I thought that was a great example of why it's a good thing.
I think that's a great example. I didn't know that story at all.
Read about it. It's actually quite intriguing, and Fortune and Forbes, a number of business publications have done really, really thoughtful, insightful stories on it.
Thank you for sharing that, Maria. You're such an inspiration to all of us. What would you say to someone who's just starting out, who's maybe been attracted to aviation, but sees that it's very male-dominated and isn't sure that they want to stay in an industry like this? What would you say to those women to encourage them to try aviation out? What are attractive things about this industry?
First of all, never get discouraged because there's more men in the industry. Actually, see it as an opportunity to advance. And work hard and self-motivate. Don't wait for anybody else to try to motivate you to achieve and create and develop and be. You need to do that within yourself. And don't let the typical stereotypes bring you down. or try to disillusion you in the environment that you're in. I always look at things, and I look at things with the glass half full, right? I don't look at things with the glass half empty. And so whenever I'm challenged, and we have many challenges in our industry, we have many challenges with the dynamic of male, female. I'm the only female executive leader of our holding company, right? Not even Signature, I'm talking about the holding company. So I don't even think about that. I see myself as an equal. And I see myself as an equal that always engages. I always give my opinion. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for millennial women, because as a trait, millennials are much more outspoken than we were as a generation. They have more confidence, more education, more capacity. So it's the perfect fit, in my view, as a career. And I just think that we need to find better ways of marketing and creating awareness around the aviation career in the female sector. And I also think that we need to not just focus on it as being a pilot or being an engineer, but being much more, or being part of it in a broader sense.
Right, there are a lot of opportunities in this industry to be innovative. Our company is not engineering or piloting. I don't have my pilot's license, and I'm definitely not an engineer. And I found a great job in aviation. So there are lots of different things to explore, and there are lots of great opportunities to meet people from all different cultures and see the world.
Exactly.
How many countries have you been in? How thick is your passport, Maria?
Well, I'm on several versions later, but I save all my passports. But I visited almost every continent, and you're right, this industry basically takes you to the world. And what better way of seeing it as part of your job? And I think that's another aspect, you're absolutely right, that is not promoted sufficiently. The fact that aviation is part of travel and part of the business of travel, and that it should be seen as exciting and engaging and an opportunity to advance. But really, I think it falls on all of us to actually work on this and do a good job in promoting it.
Absolutely. So you spoke a few minutes ago about making sure that you have line personnel
Yes.
who are female, and making sure that you have managers, GMs who are female. Do you have a formal process in place, or is it just something that you hammer home in every HR meeting that you have?
Well, I do have a process in place. And the process is we have very, very good discussions with our leadership team at Signature about how we identify and retain talent that's diverse. And what do we need to do to support the growth of that talent? So it would be very easy to just say, well, I'm just gonna put that line guy in the lead position and put that line guy in a supervisor position, or take that supervisor and put him in. That's really easy. What's harder is to say, we've got a person that we probably need to invest a little bit more in to develop, but we should use that as an opportunity to develop someone that may not have all the skill sets yet, but we'll get them there. And so we have a lot of conversations about it's harder, and maybe we have to work harder at developing people, but it's essential. 52% of our frontline employees are diverse. So in my view, 52% of our leadership should be diverse at a minimum, because we should represent what our employees are and who they are. And I also think our customers are incredibly diverse.
Right.
Incredibly diverse. And I think our customers enjoy seeing that diversity in our operation and with our employees and engaging with them. So to me, it's just a business essential.
Well, one of the things that Mary told me about you, and obviously you're a woman, one of the things that she told me about you that was charming, and I heard you do it this morning, is that you're fluent in Spanish because you're from Cuba. So you encourage that diversity by encouraging people in their native language.
So when I go to a base, we have many Hispanic line employees. And when I go to a base, I make a point, of course I speak English all the time, but I make a point of greeting them in Spanish, of trying to personalize my relationship with them. And I don't do it to leave anybody out, but I do it to be inclusive so that they understand that it's important to us. And from what I'm told, it makes a big difference that I do that I take the time to do it. And I just do it for a couple of minutes, and I engage with them. I ask them how they came to the signature, what do they like about their job, you know, what's their family like, and they're first generation employees in this country. And I think we want them to stay in this career. And I think that we need to do those kinds of things so that it's not so procedural and technical. And I use that other side of emotional intelligence to make sure that we engage in that manner. So thanks for mentioning that.
So I'm hearing you say that we need to be inclusive and make sure that our hiring practices include people from other genders and maybe races. I'm hearing you say that we need to engage with people, and then I heard you say that we need to develop people. So are those your three keys to attracting
very good summarization. Women? Excellent.
Great.
Excellent.
Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss about what you do to promote women within your organization besides just development? Is there any sort of formal process in place? I know at United Airlines they have a group of women that gets together and promotes one another. Now, do you do something similar?
Well, now that we have more women in the organization, what we do is we put them through leadership development. We have a program at Signature through Duke University. It includes everyone, but we make sure that we get as many diverse management candidates as we can into the program. In addition to that, one of the things that I'm looking to do in 17 and beyond is actually create a women's leadership team at a leadership, I don't want to call it an organization, but I want to call it a leadership discussion group for women in Signature. So we have a tremendous number of women in staff roles at Signature. They're analysts, they're in finance, they're in accounting, they're in legal, they're in our revenue management areas. So we have a good representation on staff. And so it gives us now an opportunity to use that influx of gender diversity in a more proactive way. So we'll begin that in 17 once we're done with the integration of our new Signature locations.
Fantastic. Are there any questions from the audience?
So your question is a great question. If you have two candidates and you feel the male candidate is stronger and you don't choose the female candidate, are you creating that innate disadvantage and not diversifying? I actually think you should always choose the best candidate. But what I think you should do is you should identify the gaps that the female candidate has. And you should work with her supervisor or her direct manager, or even if it's you, and talk to her and speak to her about her willingness to develop further in those gaps. And actually, that gives you a great payoff because you wind up with two great employees. And I think the encouragement is, look, you're not ready for this particular slot, and here are the reasons why, but we're going to work on those. But I want you to stay focused on that so that the next opportunity is something we can look at. So I believe that we should do it in an encouragement and development sort of way, as opposed to having HR call her and tell her she didn't get the job. She's experiencing challenges in a mentor-mentee relationship where the mentee isn't being as responsive as they should be, given the fact that they're being mentored. That is a behavior that is attributable also to that millennial. We are studying millennials. We have a consulting company that's actually working with us. And Mary knows because we've been spending time, money, and focus, management focus, on managing our millennial workforce. So we've learned a lot about it, and so you need to work it through. But the only thing I would say to you is there should be an initial conversation with that candidate, that mentee, about expectations. And there should be a contract. And if they are willing to commit to that and perform in that fashion and show evidence that they're doing it, great. And if they're not, then say it up front. Listen, this is the way this works. And You're in, we're in. If we're not, it's okay.
One of the things that I would add to that is that I notice with a lot of millennials, and I speak about this frequently, is that they really want to understand the why. So if you can
Correct.
talk to them about purpose, if you can talk to them about why, they're much more likely to be engaged with you personally, with your company, and with your company's mission than if you're just telling them
What to do.
What. And so it really causes us as Generation X to look inside and say, okay, why are we doing this? Is there some change that we want to evoke? Or are we just going through the motions? Because when we're just going through the motions and checking the boxes of our job, we aren't inspiring them. But if we inspire them, they will light the world on fire for us. It's just figuring out that one little 3-letter word.
Correct.
Well, Maria, thank you so much. You know, I arranged this talk so that I can actually meet you because I'm such an admirer of what you've done at Signature. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
On the heels of a board meeting and after a very busy show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.